There was the classic lime jello with pears and cottage cheese. Or how about a crown jewel mold with different colored cubes of jello set in a creamy base? For the adventurous, there were molds featuring olives, shrimp, or even corned beef. I remember my great-aunt Mildred's famous Rainbow Delight Jell-O mold. It had 7 layers, each a different color and flavor. The top layer was clear and had maraschino cherries suspended in it like little red jewels. It took her 2 days to make, and it was always the first thing to disappear at family gatherings. But if these Jell-O molds were so popular, why don't we see them anymore? What caused these wiggly wonders to vanish from our holiday tables? Well, it wasn't one thing, but a perfect storm of changing tastes and health concerns. As we moved into the 1980s and 90s, people started to become more aware of artificial ingredients. The bright, almost neon colors of Jell-O began to seem less appealing and more, well, artificial. Health consciousness played a big role too. Jell-O is essentially sugar, artificial flavors, and gelatin. As people became more nutrition savvy, they started to look for healthier alternatives. Fresh fruit salads began to replace the jiggly molds on many tables. There was also a shift in what was considered sophisticated in home entertaining. The molded salads and desserts that once seemed so elegant started to feel dated and kitschy. Hosts began to favor more gourmet offerings that didn't come from a box. But perhaps the biggest factor was simply time. Making a really impressive Jell-O mold takes patience and planning. As our lives got busier, fewer people were willing to spend hours unmolding and remolding layers of Jell-O for a single dish. So, little by little, Jell-O molds slipped off our holiday menus. They went from being the star of the show to a nostalgic relic of the past. Today, you might still find them at the occasional retro-themed party, but they're a rare sight on most Thanksgiving tables. You've heard of Jell-O, but have you ever tasted meat jelly? No, that's not a typo. Aspic was once the pinnacle of culinary craftsmanship, challenging the skills of even the most talented home cooks. But why did this savory showstopper vanish from our tables? Aspic is essentially a savory gelatin dish, usually made with meat stock or consommé. It's been around for centuries, originally used as a way to preserve meat before refrigeration. But in the mid-20th century, it had a major comeback as a fancy dish for dinner parties and special occasions. Now, imagine slicing into what looks like a crystal-clear sculpture, only to find chunks of chicken, vegetables, or even eggs suspended inside. That's aspic for you. The texture was unique, firm yet wobbly, smooth yet surprisingly meaty. It was like nothing else on the dinner table, and that was part of its appeal. Back in the 1970s, aspic recipes were all the rage in cookbooks and women's magazines. One of the most popular versions was chicken in aspic. Picture this: tender pieces of cooked chicken artfully arranged in a clear gelatin mold, often with colorful vegetables and herbs scattered throughout. It was like a 3D work of art that you could eat. But chicken wasn't the only star of the aspic show. There were aspics made with beef, fish, and even vegetables. Some ambitious cooks would create elaborate layers, each with different ingredients, resulting in a kind of savory, meaty trifle. Making aspic wasn't for the faint of heart. It required precise cooking techniques to get that perfect wobble. Too much gelatin, and you'd end up with a rubbery mess. Too little, and your aspic would collapse into a sad puddle on the plate. Getting it just right was a true mark of skill in the kitchen. Food historians often talk about how aspic was viewed as the height of sophistication. One food writer from the era described it as the crown jewel of any dinner party. Hosts would proudly unveil their aspic creations, basking in the oohs and ahs from their impressed guests. But here's the thing about aspic: it was also a bit of a dare. Slicing into that wobbling tower of meat jelly was a test of bravery for many dinner guests. You never quite knew what you'd find inside or how it would taste. It was culinary Russian roulette. So why did this sophisticated dish fall out of favor? Well, tastes change, and what was once seen as the pinnacle of elegance started to seem, well, a bit weird. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people began to favor fresher, less processed-looking foods. The idea of suspending meat in gelatin started to lose its appeal. There was also a shift towards lighter, healthier eating. Aspic, with its rich meat stocks and heavy ingredients, didn't quite fit the bill. Plus, let's be honest, the texture was an acquired taste. As newer, more exotic cuisines became popular, the wobbly meat jelly started to seem old-fashioned. The rise of convenience foods played a role too. Aspic takes time and skill to make properly. As our lives got busier, fewer people were willing to spend hours carefully layering ingredients in a mold and waiting for it to set. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find aspic on many dinner tables. It's become more of a culinary curiosity, something you might encounter in a vintage cookbook or a very traditional French restaurant. But who knows? Maybe one day it'll make a comeback. After all, everything old becomes new again eventually. Remember that sweet, pillowy dessert your grandmother always insisted on bringing to Thanksgiving? The one that barely qualified as a salad despite its name? Let's dive into the colorful world of Ambrosia salad and uncover why this marshmallow-studded treat became an endangered species at modern holiday feasts. Ambrosia salad was a staple at potlucks and family gatherings throughout the 1960s and 70s. This fluffy concoction typically featured a blend of canned fruit cocktail, miniature marshmallows, and shredded coconut, all held together with a generous dollop of whipped cream or Cool Whip. Some versions included chopped nuts for crunch, while others threw in a handful of maraschino cherries for that extra pop of color. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when no holiday table was complete without a big bowl of Ambrosia salad. This sweet, creamy dish was a hit at church socials, neighborhood barbecues, and just about any gathering where people brought food to share. But these days, you'd be hard-pressed to find Ambrosia salad at most modern Thanksgiving celebrations. What happened? The origins of Ambrosia salad are a bit murky, but it's believed to have originated in the southern United States in the late 19th century. The name Ambrosia comes from Greek mythology, where it was considered the food of the gods. Early versions of the dish were much simpler, often just oranges and coconut. As canned fruit and marshmallows became more widely available in the mid-20th century, the recipe evolved into the fluffy, sweet concoction we remember from our childhoods. One of the fascinating things about Ambrosia salad is how it varied from region to region and family to family. In some parts of the country, you might find pineapple chunks or mandarin oranges mixed in. Other recipes called for sour cream instead of whipped cream, giving the dish a tangy twist. Some folks even added a splash of alcohol for the grown-ups. These regional variations reflected local tastes and available ingredients, making Ambrosia salad a true American culinary melting pot. So, what made this sugary salad so beloved? For one, it was incredibly easy to make. Even novice cooks could whip up an impressive-looking Ambrosia salad with just a few cans of fruit and a bag of marshmallows. It was also a great make-ahead dish, perfect for busy hosts who needed to prepare food in advance. But perhaps most importantly, Ambrosia salad was fun. Its bright colors and sweet, creamy texture appealed to kids and adults alike. It was comfort food that didn't take itself too seriously. But if Ambrosia salad was so popular, why did it vanish from our holiday tables? As with many food trends, changing tastes and health concerns played a big role. As we became more health conscious in the 1980s and 90s, the idea of a salad made primarily of canned fruit, marshmallows, and whipped cream started to lose its appeal. The high sugar content and lack of nutritional value made Ambrosia salad seem more like a guilty pleasure than a proper side dish. There was also a shift towards fresher, less processed ingredients. As people began to favor homemade whipped cream over Cool Whip and fresh fruit over canned, the convenience factor that made Ambrosia salad so appealing began to fade. The rise of global cuisine and more sophisticated palates also played a part. Dishes that once seemed exotic and special began to feel dated and overly sweet. Despite its decline, Ambrosia salad still holds a special place in many people's hearts. It's a reminder of a time when food was about fun and togetherness, not just nutrition. While it may not be a regular feature on modern holiday tables, don't be surprised if you see it making a comeback at retro-themed parties or as a nostalgic treat. From sweet to savory, let's explore another vanishing appetizer that once graced every party platter. Remember those little green sticks filled with cheese? That's right, we're talking about stuffed celery, the forgotten finger food that's all but disappeared from our holiday spreads. Imagine a time when celery was the trendiest vegetable at the party. Sounds crazy, right? Yet in the 1970s, this humble green stalk was the vessel for one of the most popular appetizers around. What transformed celery from a soup ingredient to a savory sensation? And why did its moment in the spotlight fade? Stuffed celery was the go-to finger food for any respectable 1970s gathering. This simple yet satisfying appetizer combined the crunch of fresh celery with the creamy goodness of cheese spread. It was easy to make, fun to eat, and perfect for feeding a crowd. Making stuffed celery was a breeze, which was part of its appeal. You'd start with a bunch of crisp celery stalks, wash them thoroughly, and pat them dry. Then came the fun part, filling each curved celery stick with a generous smear of cheese spread. The most popular filling was pimento cheese, a southern specialty that had gained nationwide popularity by the 1970s. But pimento cheese wasn't the only star of the stuffed celery show. Creative home cooks came up with all sorts of delicious variations. Some added a kick with jalapenos, while others mixed in garlic for extra flavor. Cream cheese was another popular base, often jazzed up with herbs or finely chopped vegetables. For those who wanted to get really fancy, there were even recipes that called for blending different types of cheese to create unique flavor combinations. Stuffed celery wasn't just about taste, it was a conversation starter too. People have strong opinions about this appetizer, and it often sparked lively debates at family gatherings. Some folks couldn't get enough of the crunchy, creamy combo, while others found the whole concept a bit odd. One partygoer from the era remembers, "My aunt always brought stuffed celery to our holiday dinners. Half the family would dive in like it was going out of style, while the other half politely pushed it around their plates." But if stuffed celery was such a hit, why don't we see it at parties anymore? What caused this simple snack to disappear from our tables? The answer lies in changing appetizer trends and evolving tastes. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people started craving more elaborate and diverse party foods. Stuffed celery, with its simple ingredients and straightforward preparation, began to seem a bit old-fashioned compared to newer, more exotic options. Health consciousness played a role too. While celery itself is very low in calories, the cheese fillings were often high in fat and calories. As people became more nutrition-savvy, they started looking for lighter alternatives. Fresh veggie platters with low-fat dips began to replace cheese-filled options on many party tables. The decline of stuffed celery also reflects broader changes in how we eat and entertain. In the 1970s, sit-down dinner parties were common, and finger foods like stuffed celery were perfect for keeping guests satisfied before the main course. Today, we're more likely to host casual gatherings with a variety of small plates or appetizers, rather than a formal multi-course meal. Interestingly, celery consumption in the U.S. has fluctuated over the years. While it's still a common ingredient in soups and salads, its popularity as a standalone vegetable or appetizer base has definitely waned. The days when a stalk of stuffed celery was considered a party-worthy treat are largely behind us. But who knows? Food trends are cyclical, and what's old often becomes new again. Maybe stuffed celery is due for a comeback. Until then, we'll have to satisfy ourselves with memories of those crunchy, cheesy bites that once graced every party platter. From crisp celery, let's move to a creamier vanished dish. Remember those perfectly spherical appetizers that were the life of every 1970s party? That's right. We're about to roll into the cheesy world of an appetizer that's all but disappeared from our modern gatherings. Picture this: a perfectly spherical appetizer, coated in chopped nuts, sitting proudly at the center of every 1970s party spread. That's right, we're talking about the cheese ball, the retro snack that was once the life of the party. But why did these cheesy orbs roll out of fashion? Let's dig into the gooey, savory world of this vanished appetizer. Cheese balls were the ultimate party food in the 1970s. Picture a softball-sized globe of creamy, tangy cheese, often rolled in crushed nuts or herbs. It was a simple concept that packed a flavorful punch. You'd spread this cheesy goodness on crackers and voila, instant party magic. But here's the thing about cheese balls. They weren't just one-note wonders. Oh no, these versatile appetizers came in a dizzying array of flavors and coatings. You might find a classic cheddar and cream cheese combo, or something more adventurous like a blue cheese and walnut blend. Some folks got creative with add-ins like chopped bacon, green onions, or even pineapple for a sweet and savory twist. The coatings were just as varied. While chopped pecans were a popular choice, you might also encounter cheese balls rolled in fresh herbs, paprika, or even crushed pretzels. Each cheese ball was like a little culinary experiment, a reflection of the host's tastes and creativity. One of the reasons cheese balls became so popular was their ease of preparation. Even novice cooks could whip up an impressive-looking appetizer with just a few ingredients and a bit of elbow grease. You'd mix your cheeses, shape the mixture into a ball, and roll it in your chosen coating. Then, just chill and serve. It was a no-fuss way to feed a crowd and still look like a culinary whiz. Cheese balls were also great for parties because they could be made ahead of time. In fact, many recipes insisted that they tasted better after a day or two in the fridge, allowing the flavors to meld. This made them a go-to choice for busy hosts who wanted to impress without the last-minute kitchen scramble. Of course, no discussion of cheese balls would be complete without mentioning their tendency to cause hilarious mishaps. Their perfectly round shape made them prone to rolling, leading to some memorable party moments. One partygoer from the era recalls, "My aunt's prized cheese ball once escaped from the buffet table and rolled across the living room floor. We all watched in horror as it picked up carpet fuzz before coming to rest under the coffee table." Needless to say, that was the end of that cheese ball. So, why did these cheesy orbs roll off our tables? What caused them to disappear from our modern gatherings? Well, as with many food trends, changing tastes played a big role. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, party food started to become more sophisticated. The humble cheese ball began to seem a bit dated compared to newer, more exotic appetizer options. Health consciousness also contributed to the cheese ball's decline. These creamy concoctions were often high in fat and calories, which didn't align well with the growing focus on lighter, healthier eating. As people became more nutrition savvy, they started looking for alternatives that felt less indulgent. The way we entertain has changed too. In the 1970s, formal cocktail parties were common, and cheese balls were perfect for this type of gathering. Today, we're more likely to host casual get-togethers with a variety of small plates or finger foods rather than a single centerpiece appetizer. But don't count cheese balls out just yet. Like many retro foods, they're starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern cheese ball recipes often feature artisanal cheeses and gourmet add-ins, giving this classic appetizer a contemporary twist. Who knows? Maybe cheese balls are poised to roll back onto our party tables, ready to charm a new generation of food lovers. From cheese, let's move on to meat. Remember those tiny, tangy meatballs that were a must-have at every 1970s gathering? That's right. We're about to dive into the world of another vanishing appetizer that once ruled the party scene. Hold on to your cocktail glasses, folks. We're about to plunge into the icy waters of a once ubiquitous appetizer that went from red carpet to red-faced. What delicacy dared to charge caviar prices for crustaceans you could count on one hand? Ah, the classic shrimp cocktail. Picture this: a crystal glass filled with crushed ice, its rim adorned with plump pink shrimp, tails curled over the edge like they're waving hello. And nestled in the center, a tangy pool of cocktail sauce just waiting to be dipped into. This wasn't just an appetizer, it was a statement. Back in the 1970s, serving shrimp cocktail at your party was like rolling out a red carpet for your guests. It screamed sophistication and luxury. You weren't just hosting a get-together, you were throwing a soiree. One food enthusiast from the era put it perfectly. You could pretend you were at a five-star restaurant even though you were perched at a fold-out table. But what made this dish so special? Well, for starters, shrimp wasn't as readily available or affordable as it is today. Serving it was a way to show your guests you'd gone the extra mile. Plus, there was something undeniably elegant about those curved shrimp perched on the edge of a glass, like little pink commas punctuating your party's success. The star of the show, aside from the shrimp itself, was the cocktail sauce. While you could buy it pre-made, any host worth their salt made it from scratch. The classic recipe was a zesty blend of ketchup, horseradish, Worcestershire sauce, and a squeeze of lemon juice. But oh, the variations! Some folks added a splash of vodka for an extra kick. Others swirled in a dollop of creamy avocado for a California twist. And the truly daring? They'd spice things up with a dash of hot sauce or a pinch of wasabi. Preparing shrimp cocktail was a bit of an art form. You had to cook the shrimp just right. Too little and they were rubbery, too much and they were tough. Then came the meticulous deveining and peeling, leaving just that last bit of tail for easy handling. Arranging them on the glass was the final touch, a delicate balance of presentation and practicality. So why did this seafood star fall from grace? Why don't we see shrimp cocktails at every party these days? Well, like many food trends, it fell victim to changing tastes and evolving dining habits. For one, shrimp became more commonplace. What was once a luxury item started showing up in everyday dishes, from stir-fries to salads. The novelty wore off, and suddenly, serving shrimp cocktail felt a bit, well, old-fashioned. Then there's the rise of casual dining. As our parties became less formal, the idea of a fancy appetizer served in a special glass started to feel out of place. People wanted food they could eat while mingling, not something that required them to carefully balance a glass and navigate with a tiny fork. Health concerns played a role too. As we became more aware of cholesterol and the environmental impact of shrimp farming, some folks started to shy away from this once beloved appetizer. But perhaps the biggest factor was simply that our palates evolved. We started craving more complex flavors, more exotic ingredients. The simple combination of shrimp and cocktail sauce began to seem a bit boring compared to the new appetizers showing up at parties. Yet, like many retro foods, shrimp cocktail isn't completely gone. You might still spot it at old-school steakhouses or retro-themed parties. And who knows? Maybe it's due for a comeback. After all, everything old becomes new again eventually. Speaking of comebacks, let's leave the sea behind and head to land. Remember those tiny, tangy meatballs that used to be the hit of every party? That's right, we're about to roll into the world of another vanishing appetizer that once ruled the buffet table. Picture this. It's 1975, and you're at a neighbor's house party. The air is filled with laughter, music, and an oddly sweet aroma. What bite-sized treat had partygoers lining up at the buffet table, armed with nothing but toothpicks and determination? Sweet and sour meatballs were the ultimate party food of the 1970s. These little morsels of meaty goodness combined the savory taste of ground beef with a tangy sweet sauce that kept you coming back for more. The basic recipe was simple. Mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, eggs, and spices, roll them into bite-sized balls, and then simmer them in a sauce that would make your taste buds do a happy dance. But here's where it gets interesting. The secret ingredient that made these meatballs truly special? Grape jelly. That's right. The same stuff you spread on your PB&J sandwiches was the key to creating that perfect balance of sweet and sour. Mixed with chili sauce or ketchup, the grape jelly melted into a glossy, irresistible sauce that coated each meatball like a savory candy shell. These meatballs weren't just delicious, they were also incredibly convenient for hosts. The introduction of slow cookers in the 1970s revolutionized party food preparation, and sweet and sour meatballs were the perfect match for this new technology. Hosts could toss all the ingredients into the slow cooker hours before the party, and by the time guests arrived, the meatballs were perfectly cooked and swimming in that addictive sauce. For larger gatherings, chafing dishes kept the meatballs warm throughout the night, ensuring that even late arrivals could enjoy a hot, tasty treat. Eating these meatballs was an experience in itself. Armed with nothing but a toothpick, partygoers would spear a meatball, or two if you were feeling adventurous, and pop it into their mouth. But beware, that sauce was notorious for dripping. Many a 1970s partygoer can recall the delicate balancing act of trying to get the meatball from the chafing dish to their mouth without leaving a trail of sweet and sour sauce on their polyester shirt. These meatballs weren't just food, they were a social lubricant. Gathered around the buffet table, guests would chat and laugh as they reached for another toothpick. The shared experience of trying to eat these messy but delicious bites created a sense of camaraderie among partygoers. It was casual, fun, and perfectly embodied the playful approach to food that characterized 1970s entertaining. So, why did these tasty bites roll off our buffet tables? What caused them to disappear from our modern gatherings? As with many food trends, changing tastes played a big role. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, there was a shift towards more sophisticated global flavors. The sweet and sour combination that once seemed so exciting began to feel a bit dated compared to newer, more exotic options. Health consciousness also contributed to the decline of sweet and sour meatballs. As people became more aware of nutrition, the idea of meatballs swimming in a sugary sauce started to lose its appeal. Hosts began to favor lighter, fresher options that aligned with changing dietary preferences. The way we entertain has also evolved. While the 1970s were all about big, casual gatherings with lots of finger foods, modern parties often feature a wider variety of smaller plates or even sit-down meals. The humble meatball, once the star of the buffet, found itself competing with a whole new world of appetizer options. But don't count sweet and sour meatballs out just yet. Like many retro foods, they're starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions might feature leaner meats or vegetarian alternatives, and that secret grape jelly ingredient? It's becoming a talking point for hosts looking to surprise their guests with a blast from the past. From meaty to eggy, let's crack open the case of another vanishing appetizer. Remember those creamy, tangy bites that were a staple of every potluck? That's right. We're about to dive into the world of deviled eggs and uncover why these devilishly good treats lost their charm. Ever wonder why your grandma's deviled eggs recipe was a closely guarded secret? These simple appetizers sparked fierce family rivalries and potluck competitions. But what made these creamy bites so devilishly tempting, and why did they suddenly vanish from our dinner tables? Deviled eggs were once the crown jewel of every potluck spread. Making them was almost like a ritual. You'd start by boiling eggs to perfection, carefully peeling them and slicing them in half. The real magic happened when you scooped out the yolks and mixed them with mayonnaise and seasonings. This creamy concoction was then piped or spooned back into the egg white halves, creating little boats of tangy, savory goodness. But here's the thing about deviled eggs: no two recipes were exactly alike. Some folks swore by a dash of mustard for extra zing, while others added pickle relish for a sweet and tangy twist. Adventurous cooks in the 1970s even experimented with curry powder or crumbled bacon bits. The possibilities were endless, and every family had their own special touch that made their deviled eggs stand out from the crowd. The term "deviled" in cooking actually dates back to the 18th century. It originally referred to dishes that were highly seasoned or spicy. Deviled eggs fit the bill perfectly with their zesty, flavorful filling. The name added a bit of excitement to what might otherwise be considered a plain old egg dish. These little bites of heaven weren't just party food, they were often a topic of friendly competition among families. Aunts and grandmothers would try to outdo each other with their secret ingredients or unique garnishes. Some topped their eggs with a sprinkle of paprika for color, while others got fancy with fresh herbs or even caviar for special occasions. Food historians often point out that deviled eggs symbolize a bygone era of communal dining and potluck gatherings. They reflect a time when friends and family would come together, each bringing a dish to share. Deviled eggs were the perfect choice. Easy to make in large batches, portable, and always a crowd pleaser. So why did these creamy, tangy treats start to disappear from our tables? What caused their fall from grace? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards some of their key ingredients. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people became more health conscious. Eggs, once considered a nutritious staple, came under fire due to concerns about cholesterol. The rise of low-fat diets also put mayonnaise in the crosshairs. Suddenly, those delicious deviled eggs didn't seem so innocent anymore. The shift in how we eat and entertain also played a role. As our lives got busier, we started to favor quicker, easier options for party food. Deviled eggs, while not complicated, do require some time and effort to prepare properly. Many hosts opted for simpler, store-bought alternatives. But don't write off deviled eggs just yet. Like many retro foods, they're starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature healthier ingredients or creative twists on the classic recipe. You might find avocado or Greek yogurt subbing in for some of the mayonnaise, or exotic spices adding a new flavor dimension. Whether you love them or hate them, deviled eggs are a part of our culinary history. They remind us of a time when food was about more than just nutrition. It was about coming together, sharing, and a little bit of friendly competition. From eggs to vegetables, let's uncover another vanishing side dish. Remember those green beans smothered in creamy soup and topped with crispy onions? That's right. We're about to dig into the rise and fall of a Thanksgiving staple that's slowly disappearing from our holiday tables. Picture this: a casserole dish filled with tender green beans smothered in creamy mushroom soup and topped with a layer of crispy fried onions. Sound familiar? That's right. We're talking about the classic green bean casserole, a dish that once reigned supreme on Thanksgiving tables across America. But why has this beloved side started to vanish from our holiday spreads? Green bean casserole became a Thanksgiving staple thanks to its perfect combination of simplicity and comfort. The basic ingredients were easy to find and even easier to put together. You'd start with canned green beans, though some ambitious cooks used fresh. Mix in a can of cream of mushroom soup and top it all off with those irresistibly crunchy fried onions. Pop it in the oven, and voila! You had a side dish that could feed a crowd and still leave room for seconds. But here's where things get interesting. This casserole wasn't just a random combination of ingredients. It actually has a pretty fascinating origin story. Back in 1955, a woman named Dorcas Riley created this dish while working in the Campbell's Soup Test Kitchen. Her goal? To come up with a recipe that used ingredients most Americans already had in their pantries. Little did she know, she was about to create a holiday classic that would grace tables for decades to come. Green bean casserole quickly became a hit, spreading across the country faster than you could say, "Pass the gravy." It was the perfect addition to Thanksgiving menus. Creamy, comforting, and just green enough to count as a vegetable. Plus, it was a lifesaver for hosts who needed to feed a lot of people without spending hours in the kitchen. Now, you might think that everyone loved this dish equally, but that wasn't quite the case. Green bean casserole has always been a bit of a polarizing dish. Some folks couldn't get enough of its creamy, crunchy goodness. Others, well, let's just say they were less enthusiastic. One food writer from the era put it perfectly. Green bean casserole is the dish that divides families. Half the table dives in like it's going out of style, while the other half politely pushes it around their plates. But if green bean casserole was such a hit, why has it started to disappear from our Thanksgiving tables? What caused this creamy, crunchy side to lose its place in our holiday hearts? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards processed foods. As we moved into the 21st century, people became more health conscious and started paying closer attention to what was in their food. Suddenly, a dish made primarily from canned soup and fried onions didn't seem so appealing anymore. The high sodium content and processed ingredients that once made green bean casserole so convenient became its downfall in an era of clean eating and fresh whole foods. There's also been a shift towards more diverse and sophisticated holiday menus. As our palates have expanded, many hosts are opting for fancier vegetable dishes or recipes that showcase fresh, seasonal produce. Green bean casserole, with its humble canned ingredients, started to feel a bit outdated compared to roasted Brussels sprouts or kale salads. But don't count green bean casserole out just yet. Like many classic dishes, it's starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature fresh green beans, homemade mushroom sauce, and even gourmet fried onions. Some adventurous cooks are adding their own twists, like bacon bits or slivered almonds, to bring this retro dish into the 21st century. What if I told you that one of Thanksgiving's most beloved side dishes was actually closer to being a dessert? Sweet potato casserole once reigned supreme, blurring the lines between savory and sweet. But why did this sugary sensation start to vanish from our holiday spreads? Sweet potato casserole was a staple on Thanksgiving tables for decades. The basic recipe was simple but oh so delicious. You'd start with mashed sweet potatoes, mix in some butter, sugar, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. Then came the pièce de résistance, a layer of gooey marshmallows or crunchy pecans on top. Pop it in the oven, and you had a side dish that could easily pass for dessert. But here's where things got interesting. The topping choice sparked quite the debate among families and regions. In some parts of the country, marshmallows were the only way to go. That sweet, gooey layer would melt and brown in the oven, creating a soft, sticky topping that kids and adults alike couldn't resist. Other folks swore by a crunchy pecan topping, often mixed with brown sugar and butter to create a praline-like crust. This divide wasn't just about taste. It often reflected regional preferences. In the South, you were more likely to find the pecan version, while the marshmallow-topped casserole was popular in other parts of the country. Some ambitious cooks even tried to please everyone by dividing the casserole in half, with marshmallows on one side and pecans on the other. Sweet potato casserole wasn't just food, it was a childhood memory in a dish. Many people have fond recollections of this sugary side. One food enthusiast from the era shared, "My aunt's sweet potato casserole was always the highlight of Thanksgiving for me as a kid. I'd make a beeline for it as soon as the turkey was carved. It was like getting to eat dessert with dinner." Regional variations added even more flavor to this beloved dish. In some parts of the South, you might find a splash of bourbon mixed in with the sweet potatoes. New England versions sometimes included maple syrup instead of sugar. And in Hawaii, you might encounter a sweet potato casserole made with purple sweet potatoes and topped with coconut. So, why has this sweet dish started to disappear from our Thanksgiving tables? What caused it to lose its place of honor next to the turkey and stuffing? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards sugar and nutrition. As we moved into the 21st century, people became more health conscious. The idea of a vegetable dish loaded with sugar, butter, and marshmallows started to seem less appealing. Nutritionists began warning about the high sugar content of many traditional holiday dishes, and sweet potato casserole was often at the top of the list. There was also a shift towards showcasing the natural flavors of vegetables. Many cooks began to favor simpler preparations that let the sweet potato's natural sweetness shine through. Roasted sweet potatoes with just a touch of seasoning started to replace the heavily sweetened casseroles of the past. But don't count sweet potato casserole out just yet. Like many classic dishes, it's starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature less sugar and healthier toppings. Some cooks are experimenting with natural sweeteners like maple syrup or coconut sugar. Others are skipping the marshmallows altogether in favor of a light sprinkle of pecans or a drizzle of honey. From sweet potatoes to regular spuds, let's uncover another vanishing side dish. Remember those creamy, cheesy potatoes that were a staple at every holiday gathering? That's right. We're about to dive into the world of scalloped potatoes and find out why this comforting classic has started to slip away from our Thanksgiving menus. Picture this: layers of thinly sliced potatoes nestled in a creamy sauce, topped with a golden crust of melted cheese. Sound familiar? That's right. We're talking about scalloped potatoes. the ultimate comfort food that used to grace every holiday table. But why have these creamy spuds started to slip away from our menus? Let's start with the basics. Making scalloped potatoes was like creating a delicious, starchy lasagna. You'd start by peeling and slicing potatoes paper thin. Then came the fun part, layering those potato slices in a baking dish, each layer getting a generous pour of cream and a sprinkle of seasonings. Some folks added a bit of flour to help thicken the sauce, while others let the starch from the potatoes do the work. Now, here's where things get a bit confusing. Many people use the terms scalloped potatoes and au gratin potatoes interchangeably, but there's actually a difference. Traditionally, scalloped potatoes don't include cheese in the layers, while au gratin potatoes are typically topped with cheese and breadcrumbs, creating a crispy crust. But let's be honest, most of us weren't too picky about the terminology as long as it tasted good. Speaking of taste, creative cooks came up with all sorts of variations on the classic recipe. Some added thinly sliced onions between the potato layers for extra flavor. Others threw in some diced ham or bacon for a heartier dish. And for those who wanted to sneak in some extra veggies, sliced mushrooms or spinach made tasty additions. Scalloped potatoes weren't just food, they were a warm, creamy hug on a plate. They had a way of evoking childhood memories and family gatherings. One food enthusiast from the era shared, "My grandma's scalloped potatoes were legendary. She'd only make them for special occasions, and the whole family would crowd around the table, fighting over the crispy edges." So, why have these comforting, creamy potatoes started to vanish from our menus? What caused them to slip away from their place of honor next to the holiday roast? The answer lies in changing dietary trends and evolving tastes. As we moved into the 21st century, people became more health conscious. The idea of a side dish loaded with cream and cheese started to seem less appealing. Nutritionists began warning about the high fat and calorie content of many traditional dishes, and scalloped potatoes were often at the top of the list. There was also a shift towards simpler, fresher preparations of vegetables. Many cooks began to favor dishes that let the natural flavors of the ingredients shine through. Roasted or grilled vegetables started to replace the heavy, creamy casseroles of the past. Time played a factor too. In our increasingly busy world, spending an hour or more preparing a side dish became less practical for many home cooks. Quicker, easier options started to take precedence, especially for everyday meals. But don't count scalloped potatoes out just yet. Like many classic dishes, they're starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature lighter cream sauces or even milk alternatives for a healthier twist. Some cooks are experimenting with different types of potatoes or adding extra vegetables to boost the nutritional value. Those tiny white orbs floating in a sea of creamy sauce weren't just a side dish, they were a symbol of culinary sophistication. But what made these little onions so special, and why did they suddenly vanish from our holiday tables? The story of creamed pearl onions is one of tedious preparation, rich flavors, and changing tastes. Pearl onions, those bite-sized relatives of the common onion, were a favorite of 1970s home cooks looking to add a touch of elegance to their meals. Preparing these little gems was no small feat. First, you had to blanch them in boiling water, then plunge them into an ice bath. This made the skins easier to remove, but here's the kicker: you still had to peel each tiny onion by hand. It was a labor of love that could take hours, depending on how many guests you were expecting. Once peeled, the onions were gently simmered until tender. Then came the star of the show, the cream sauce. The classic recipe called for a simple blend of butter, flour, and cream, seasoned with a touch of salt and pepper. But creative cooks often put their own spin on things. Some added a splash of white wine for extra flavor, while others sprinkled in some nutmeg or thyme. The more adventurous might even toss in some crispy bacon bits or sautéed mushrooms. Serving creamed pearl onions at your dinner party was like announcing to the world that you had arrived. It screamed sophistication and culinary prowess. One food writer from the era described them as the crown jewel of any holiday spread. After all, who else would spend hours peeling tiny onions just to impress their guests? But if these little onions were so fancy, Why don't we see them on our tables anymore? What caused them to fade from our holiday menus? Well, it wasn't just one thing, but a perfect storm of changing tastes and attitudes. First, there's the time factor. As our lives got busier, spending hours peeling tiny onions started to seem less like a culinary adventure and more like a chore. Quick and easy side dishes began to take precedence, especially for everyday meals. Then there's the health angle. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people became more conscious of what they were eating. Cream sauces, once the height of culinary sophistication, started to fall out of favor. They were high in fat and calories, and suddenly, that didn't seem so appealing anymore. Our tastes changed too. We started to prefer vegetables that tasted more like, well, vegetables. The idea of drowning the delicate flavor of pearl onions in a rich cream sauce began to seem less gourmet and more old-fashioned. Lighter, fresher preparations became the new standard of sophistication. But perhaps the biggest factor was simply that our definition of fancy food evolved. What once seemed elegant and impressive started to feel a bit stuffy and outdated. As we were exposed to more diverse cuisines and cooking styles, our palates expanded. Suddenly, those creamed pearl onions didn't seem quite so special anymore. Yet, like many retro dishes, creamed pearl onions aren't completely gone. You might still spot them at old-school steakhouses or on the tables of those who love to keep traditions alive. And who knows? Maybe they're due for a comeback. After all, everything old becomes new again eventually. From tiny onions, let's move on to a much bigger bird. Remember when turkey wasn't the only poultry star of the holiday table? That's right. We're about to uncover a main dish that once rivaled the turkey for holiday supremacy. Get ready to learn about a festive fowl that flew off our menus. Picture this. It's the holidays, and instead of a golden brown turkey at the center of your table, there's a plump, juicy goose. Sound strange? Well, back in the day, roast goose was just as popular as turkey for festive meals. But why did this holiday bird fly off our menus? Preparing a goose for roasting was quite the production. Unlike turkey, goose is known for its rich, fatty meat. This meant that cooks had to take extra steps to ensure the bird didn't end up swimming in its own fat. They'd start by pricking the skin all over, allowing the fat to render out during cooking. Some ambitious cooks even parboiled the goose before roasting to get rid of excess fat. Once prepped, the goose would be stuffed with aromatic herbs and fruits like apples or prunes. Then, into a hot oven it went. The high heat would crisp up the skin, turning it a beautiful golden brown. But here's where things got tricky. Goose needed constant attention during cooking. You had to keep basting it and draining off the fat to prevent flare-ups in the oven. Cooking a goose was definitely more challenging than roasting a turkey. The rich, fatty meat meant it was easy to overcook, leaving you with a dry, tough bird. Plus, geese are generally smaller than turkeys, so you needed to be more precise with your timing. One food writer from the era put it perfectly. Roasting a goose is like conducting an orchestra. Everything needs to be in perfect harmony, or the whole performance falls flat. But when done right, roast goose was a showstopper. It was usually served with traditional sides like roast potatoes, cooked in goose fat, of course, braised red cabbage, and applesauce. In some families, plum sauce was the condiment of choice, adding a sweet, tart contrast to the rich meat. Goose was more than just a meal. It was a cherished tradition for many families. One food enthusiast shared, "My grandmother's roast goose was legendary. She'd start preparing it days in advance, and the whole family would gather to watch her carve it at the table. It was like a Christmas miracle every year." So, why did goose lose its place at the holiday table? What caused this festive fowl to fly off our menus? Well, it wasn't just one thing, but a combination of factors. For starters, goose became less readily available. As turkey farming became more industrialized, turkeys became cheaper and easier to find. Geese, on the other hand, remained a specialty item, often only available at certain times of the year or from specialty butchers. Then there's the fat factor. As we became more health conscious in the 1980s and beyond, the rich, fatty meat of goose started to seem less appealing. Turkey, with its leaner meat, began to look like a healthier option for holiday meals. Changing tastes played a role too. Goose has a stronger, more distinctive flavor than turkey. As our palates changed and we began to favor milder flavors, turkey started to seem more appealing to a wider range of people. Lastly, there's the convenience factor. Turkeys are generally larger than geese, making them a better option for feeding big holiday gatherings. Plus, they're easier to cook, requiring less attention and specialized knowledge. But don't count goose out just yet. Like many traditional foods, it's starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern cooks are rediscovering the rich flavor and crispy skin that made goose so popular in the past. Who knows? Maybe one day, roast goose will reclaim its place at the center of the holiday table. Is it a salad or a dessert? This fruity, fluffy concoction sparked heated debates at dinner tables across America. But there's more to this controversial dish than meets the eye. What made Ambrosia salad a holiday staple, and why did it vanish from our Thanksgiving spreads? Ambrosia salad was a sweet and creamy treat that somehow managed to sneak its way onto the dinner table under the guise of a salad. The basic recipe was simple, but oh so indulgent. You'd start with a base of canned fruit cocktail or mandarin oranges, then fold in mini marshmallows, shredded coconut, and a generous dollop of whipped cream or Cool Whip. Some recipes called for sour cream or yogurt to balance out the sweetness, while others doubled down on the sugar rush with maraschino cherries. The debate over whether ambrosia truly qualified as a salad was fierce. On one side, you had the traditionalists who argued that anything with fruit could be called a salad. On the other, skeptics pointed out that no self-respecting salad should contain marshmallows. The controversy only added to ambrosia's charm, making it a topic of playful banter at many a holiday gathering. Ambrosia salad wasn't just one recipe, it was a canvas for family creativity. In the South, you might find pecans or walnuts mixed in for extra crunch. Some Midwestern families swore by adding a splash of maraschino cherry juice for that extra pop of color and sweetness. Out west, pineapple chunks were a popular addition, giving the dish a tropical twist. And if you were lucky enough to have an aunt or grandma who really liked to experiment, you might even encounter versions with chunks of colorful Jell-O mixed in. For many of us, ambrosia salad is more than just a dessert. It's a childhood memory in a bowl. One food enthusiast fondly recalled, "Every Thanksgiving, my grandma would bring her famous ambrosia salad. As kids, we'd hover around the dessert table, waiting for the moment we could dig into that fluffy, fruity goodness. It was like eating a cloud." So why did this sugary cloud disappear from our tables? What caused ambrosia salad to lose its place of honor at our holiday feasts? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards food and nutrition. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people became more health conscious. Suddenly, a salad, made primarily of canned fruit, marshmallows, and whipped cream, didn't seem so innocent anymore. The high sugar content and processed ingredients that once made ambrosia salad so appealing became its downfall in an era of clean eating and whole foods. There was also a shift towards more sophisticated desserts. As our palates evolved and we were exposed to a wider range of flavors and cuisines, the simple sweetness of ambrosia started to seem a bit, well, unsophisticated. Fancy chocolate mousses and exotic fruit tarts began to take center stage on dessert tables. The convenience factor that once made ambrosia so popular also contributed to its decline. As we started to value fresh homemade dishes over those made with canned and packaged ingredients, ambrosia began to feel outdated. The very ease of preparation that made it a go-to for busy hosts became a mark against it in an era that prized from-scratch cooking. But don't count ambrosia out just yet. Like many retro dishes, it's starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature fresh fruit instead of canned, and lighter alternatives to whipped cream. Some adventurous cooks are even giving it gourmet twists with ingredients like pomegranate seeds or passion fruit. Remember those vibrant, jiggly creations that wobbled their way onto our dessert tables? Jell-O molds were once the crown jewels of holiday gatherings, showcasing the host's creativity and flair. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was thrilled to see these wobbling works of art. What made Jell-O molds so divisive, and why did they eventually lose their place at the Thanksgiving table? Creating a Jell-O mold was like conducting a colorful science experiment in your kitchen. You'd start by dissolving packets of flavored gelatin in boiling water, stirring until the powder completely disappeared. Then came the fun part, adding your chosen ingredients. Canned fruit cocktail was a popular choice, but adventurous cooks didn't stop there. Some recipes called for shredded carrots, chopped celery, or even olives. The variety of Jell-O flavors available was mind-boggling. From classic strawberry and lime to more exotic options like pistachio and black cherry, the possibilities were endless. Combine that with the wide array of add-ins, and you had a dessert that could surprise and delight, or sometimes shock, your dinner guests. Unmolding these wiggly wonders was always a moment of high drama at parties. After chilling the mold for hours, you'd dip it briefly in warm water to loosen the edges. Then, with bated breath, you'd flip it onto a serving plate and gently lift the mold. Success meant a perfectly shaped, glistening creation. Failure. Well, let's just say many a hostess shed tears over a collapsed Jell-O masterpiece. The art of Jell-O mold making was taken very seriously by some. Food historians note that these colorful concoctions represented a unique blend of convenience and creativity in American cooking. Home cooks could experiment with flavors and presentations that were both fun and visually appealing. It wasn't just about taste. It was about creating a show-stopping centerpiece for your table. But if Jell-O molds were so popular, why don't we see them at every party nowadays? What caused these jiggly jewels to vanish from our dessert tables? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards food and nutrition. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people became more aware of artificial ingredients. The bright, almost neon colors of Jell-O began to seem less appealing and more, well, artificial. Health consciousness played a big role too. Jell-O is essentially sugar, artificial flavors, and gelatin. As people became more nutrition savvy, they started to look for healthier alternatives. There was also a shift in what was considered sophisticated in home entertaining. The molded salads and desserts that once seemed so elegant started to feel dated and kitschy. Hosts began to favor more gourmet offerings that didn't come from a box. Fresh fruit salads began to replace the jiggly molds on many tables. But perhaps the biggest factor was simply time. Making a really impressive Jell-O mold takes patience and planning. As our lives got busier, fewer people were willing to spend hours unmolding and remolding layers of Jell-O for a single dish. So, little by little, Jell-O molds slipped off our holiday menus. They went from being the star of the show to a nostalgic relic of the past. Today, you might still spot them at the occasional retro-themed party, but they're a rare sight on most Thanksgiving tables. What do a green dessert and a presidential scandal have in common? More than you might think. This fluffy concoction became a staple at potlucks across America, but its connection to one of the biggest political controversies of the 20th century remains a mystery. Let's unravel the secrets behind this vanishing treat. Watergate salad was a peculiar dessert that somehow managed to sneak its way onto dinner tables under the guise of a salad. The basic recipe was simple but oh so indulgent. You'd start with a base of pistachio pudding mix, then fold in crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, and chopped nuts. The whole thing was held together with a generous dollop of whipped topping, creating a fluffy, light green concoction that was hard to resist. But here's where things get interesting. Nobody really knows why it's called Watergate salad. Some say it was a clever marketing ploy, capitalizing on the infamous political scandal of the early 1970s. Others argue it was simply a catchy name that helped popularize the dish. Whatever the reason, the name stuck, and Watergate salad became a topic of conversation at many a dinner party. Like many popular recipes, Watergate salad inspired countless variations. Some folks added mandarin oranges for extra fruity flavor, while others threw in some maraschino cherries for a pop of color. Coconut was another popular addition, giving the salad a tropical twist. And if you were lucky enough to have an aunt or grandma who liked to experiment, you might even encounter versions with chunks of colorful Jell-O mixed in. Watergate salad wasn't just a dessert, it was a social phenomenon. It became a staple at potlucks and family gatherings, often sparking friendly competition among home cooks. One food writer noted, "It was a dish that brought people together, often served at family gatherings and potlucks, symbolizing the comfort of home-cooked meals during a time of political unrest." The popularity of Watergate salad coincided with a boom in convenience foods. Pistachio pudding mix sales saw a significant rise during the 1970s as more and more home cooks embraced the ease of packaged ingredients. It was the perfect dessert for busy hosts, quick to make, easy to transport, and always a crowd pleaser. So, why did this green treat disappear from our tables? What caused Watergate salad to lose its place of honor at our gatherings? The answer lies in changing attitudes towards food and nutrition. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, people became more health conscious. Suddenly, a dessert made primarily of pudding mix, canned fruit, and whipped topping didn't seem so appealing anymore. The artificial colors and flavors that once made Watergate salad so eye-catching became its downfall in an era of clean eating and whole foods. There was also a shift towards more sophisticated desserts. As our palates evolved and we were exposed to a wider range of flavors and cuisines, the simple sweetness of Watergate salad started to seem a bit, well, unsophisticated. Fancy chocolate mousses and exotic fruit tarts began to take center stage on dessert tables. The convenience factor that once made Watergate salad so popular also contributed to its decline. As we started to value fresh homemade dishes over those made with packaged ingredients, Watergate salad began to feel outdated. The very ease of preparation that made it a go-to for busy hosts became a mark against it in an era that prized from-scratch cooking. But don't count Watergate salad out just yet. Like many retro dishes, it's starting to make a comeback in some circles. Modern versions often feature fresh ingredients and natural food coloring, appealing to those who love a nostalgic treat but prefer to avoid artificial additives. Ever wondered why flipping a cake upside down became the height of dessert drama? Picture this: a steaming hot skillet, caramelized pineapple rings, and the nervous energy of hoping it all stays intact. The pineapple upside-down cake wasn't just a treat, it was culinary theater. Making this retro dessert was quite the production. You'd start by melting butter and brown sugar in a skillet or cake pan, creating a sticky, caramel-like base. Then came the fun part, arranging pineapple rings in a perfect circle with bright red maraschino cherries nestled in the centers. It was like creating edible art. Once the fruity design was in place, you'd pour a simple yellow cake batter over the top. Into the oven it went, filling the kitchen with the sweet aroma of baking cake and caramelizing fruit. But the real excitement came when it was time to serve. Flipping the cake was always a moment of high drama. After letting it cool for a bit, you'd place a serving plate on top of the pan and, with a deep breath, quickly invert the whole thing. Would the pineapple stick to the bottom of the pan? Would the cake fall apart? The suspense was palpable. When it worked, though, it was magical. Lifting the pan revealed a golden brown cake topped with glistening pineapple rings and cherries, all nestled in a pool of buttery caramel goodness. It was a showstopper, no doubt about it. Pineapple upside-down cake became a big deal in the 1950s and remained popular through the 1970s. Its rise coincided with the boom in canned pineapple production. Suddenly, this tropical fruit was available year-round, and home cooks were eager to use it in new and exciting ways. The cake wasn't just delicious, it was a symbol of post-war prosperity and convenience. It showed off the marvels of modern ingredients like canned fruit and boxed cake mixes. Plus, its dramatic presentation made it perfect for dinner parties and special occasions. Many families had their own special recipes, passed down through generations. One food enthusiast shared, My grandma's pineapple upside-down cake was legendary. She'd make it for every birthday and holiday. The way she arranged the pineapple and cherries was like a work of art. But if this cake was so beloved, why did it lose its place on our dessert tables? Well, as with many food trends, tastes changed. As we moved into the 1980s and beyond, there was a shift towards more sophisticated, less sweet desserts. The simple charm of pineapple upside-down cake started to seem a bit old-fashioned. Health consciousness played a role too. That gooey, caramelized topping that made the cake so irresistible. It was also packed with sugar and butter. As people became more aware of nutrition, many started looking for lighter alternatives. There was also a move towards fresher ingredients. While canned pineapple was once seen as a modern marvel, it began to lose favor to fresh fruits. Desserts that showcased seasonal, fresh produce became more popular. Baking trends changed as well. Home cooks started experimenting with more complex techniques and flavors. Fancy layer cakes, delicate pastries, and international desserts began to take center stage. The humble upside-down cake, with its simple preparation and homey appearance, fell out of fashion. But don't count this retro dessert out just yet. Like many classic recipes, pineapple upside-down cake is starting to make a comeback. Modern bakers are giving it fresh twists, using different fruits or adding spices to the cake batter. Some are even making miniature versions for a cute individual dessert. As we've seen, our tastes have certainly changed over the years. From Jell-O molds to cheese balls, from green bean casserole to pineapple upside-down cake, the foods that once graced our holiday tables have evolved. But one thing remains the same: the power of food to bring back memories and connect us to our past.